Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hello and welcome to all of our wonderful listeners. Thanks so much for being with us today. Today I have with me Amy Shannon. Amy is a literary consultant and the author of many books. She's written over 120 stories, and that includes several book series. She is also the founder of and the sole reviewer for Amy's Bookshelf Reviews. Amy, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. And we are actually, I announced it today that I didn't even think about it, but this is the 10th year for Amy's Bookshelf Reviews.
Oh, that is awesome. And that's interesting because we just celebrated our 10th anniversary last October. So we have been in the business for about the same amount of time. That's awesome.
That is awesome. Yes, thank you. That is really cool. I like that.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that I'd like to start with, it feels like there's just so much we can talk about. So let's start with what you're most active with now. And maybe tell us a little bit about Amy's Bookshelf Reviews and how that came into being and kind of any new initiatives you've now shared your 10-year anniversary. That's awesome. Tell us a little more about what's happening and just about Amy's Bookshelf Reviews for people that don't know about it until now.
Well, in 2013, this is when people were just starting to post reviews, on Amazon, and there were some book groups, and I was on Facebook and I was on LinkedIn, and this author had approached me. We were in this group, and I was looking for people who would read my books and post some reviews. And she said, "Oh, I write children's books. Would you mind reading some of my books and I'll read some of your books?" And it's not like doing a review swap where, you're getting a specific rating. It's like you read it and then whatever the rating is, that's what you get.
Right.
So we started doing that, and then we thought, well, we should expand. And she was writing children's books that were specific for kids that were going through, that had cancer and were going through chemo, and the books were just wonderfully written. And, she would donate them to the children's hospital. So kids knew that you could get past whatever you were going through, you could survive. And we were planning on expanding and trying to, we started reading books from unknown authors, and we were going to start a blog together and kind of just look for authors that were unknown and kind of give them reviews and stuff like that. But she called me and told me that she had cancer before, but it came back and it was full force. So she was going into hospice. And within a few weeks of hospice, she passed away. Mm-hmm. And that just continued to motivate me because I'm like, this is such a good idea. I love to read. She loved to read. So I made sure that there was a few books of hers that I hadn't read yet. And so I read them. I got the reviews. I bought them that way. Whatever royalties her family could get, they were getting something.
Yeah.
And to honor her memory. And I always think about her. Her name was Renee Robinson, and she was a children's author. And so I started just kind of doing what we did. I found a small blog site and started reading books, not asking for requests or anything. Started reading books and writing reviews and posting them. And then I think that first year I read 154 books. And that's a very low number for me now. Uh-huh. But I was told the blog that I was using eventually was obsolete. So they wanted me to move all my stuff to this new and improved website. So I was on this, one of the Wix sites, just, their free plan, and did the blog and all that stuff. Sometimes an author would see that I wrote a review on Amazon, and then they would contact me through that way and say, oh, I saw that you read this book. Would you mind reading this one? And I thought, oh, I could ask people to do requests. So I started doing that, just kind of like a little social media here and there. You want to request, send me your book information, all that kind of stuff. In 2017, the end of 2017, I found out that there were actually reviewer directories online. So I found 3 that, after doing some research on them, they were pretty reputable. So I thought, well, what the heck, I'll list mine on there. And the first 3 months of 2018, I got so many requests that by June, I had to do a review freeze where I wasn't taking any requests for a while till I caught up.
Yeah. Wow.
and it was like, I was like, where did you find me? And it just kind of grew from there. I've reviewed for actually it's almost 1,800 authors since 2014. And over 500 of them keep coming back and giving me, every time they have a new book coming out, or when they realize, oh, I don't think you read this one. So, I do that. And over the years, I find what works and what doesn't work. I tried different policies, different ways to do a review request. For a while, I was doing all the work, putting in all the information, and then I switched not that long ago to having the authors fill out their own spreadsheet, because I have this massive database of Excel spreadsheets, which has every author's information on different sheets, and they're alphabetized and they're put in order. And I was putting in all that information, and I'm like, no, I'm going to have the authors do it. It was just it's too many authors, and I just didn't have. If I was doing that all the time, didn't have time to read or to even write my own stuff. So
yeah. So is there anything over all these years of reading books and listening to audiobooks, is there anything that you could say that you've noticed that is sort of a general thing, that change or anything that you've noticed? Just curious.
Well, I've noticed the last couple of years there has been an increase in audiobooks. And, there's a few authors that have only published on an audiobook. Their book's not in print, it's on audiobook only. But a lot of authors are doing print and digital, paperback, hardcover, digital books. And I say that because, it could be any kind of format, whether it's, Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever somebody would buy a digital book, that they're turning their print book into an audiobook. And then they think that you're like, oh, well, you already reviewed the print book. Do you review audiobooks too? And I'm like, yeah, and that's a separate review. They're like, why? And I'm like, because it's different, because I review not just the story. I know what the story's about, but I listen to the quality of the audiobook. I listen to the narrator. And sometimes I've listened to books where the narrator just kind of didn't fit, their tone. It just didn't fit the story or what I thought. I'm always honest with my reviews, and I let everybody know that, the audiobook is something totally separate. And I have bookshelves on my Amy's library off my website, and some people want their book reviews real fast, and some don't care. So, when you get to it, you get to it. And then I have one for audio, and I tell them if they have one on audio, I'll listen to it, but it's a totally separate review. It's a totally separate book.
Right.
Way it is. And that's just how it is. And they don't always understand, but I try to do my best to explain things, or I clarify. Sometimes they have social media rumors going on about, oh yeah, Amazon won't do this, Amazon won't do that. Or, there's different rumors based off authors. I've seen hating on other authors. I've seen, yeah, sometimes it's like they think that every author in the world is their competition. And it's like, no, we are an author community. And I really found that out a few years ago because of something that happened to me a long time ago. In the last couple of years, I've had to have mobility aids. And what I really wanted was a mobility scooter so that I could still be independent and go to the store and do things without having to have a chaperone or be driven around. And my son started a GoFundMe, and 95% of the people who donated were authors.
Yeah.
And I was just totally amazed.
Yeah.
I was like, wow. And they're like, for all the, and they would send me a note too saying, oh, I'm sorry, I could only donate this much. I'm like, you didn't have, I was, that was what it was. It was
That's
like
beautiful.
I had, a couple of my friends do it, but my son's friends, because he started and he told them they all had to donate. but the author community, it was 95% of them donated. So I was able to get what I needed. And it was like, I've just felt part of that community. And I've always felt that way. I feel like I have like 1,700 friends around the world.
Yeah.
Because I've read their work. And when you hand somebody over your work for someone else to read, it can be like, you're nail biting because you don't know how they're going to react to it. If they like it, if they don't like it, that kind of stuff. So it's, I understand that part of it. And I've told authors that, I don't give anything lower than 3. I think 3 is fair. Maybe it needs some work, but I always try to put a positive spin on the negative when I write a review for if it's a 3, point all of the good points out. But if they send me a book and it's like I would give them a 1 or 2, I send it back to the author and I tell them why. And 9 times out of 10, this has happened about 20 times. And in 10 years, that's not that bad.
That's not bad at all.
No. And I have told them the reason why I sent it back because it hadn't gone to the editor yet. It wasn't published ready. When they're like, oh, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know, when it's ready to be published. So that's something I made sure that word publish ready is like all over my review request because I have had people send me their first draft and I don't even know what that is. I will, I do other services and I will be I've been a beta reader for publishers, for authors. I have basically I call it a network of publishers where I'm on their private go-to reviewer list. So they will send their authors, when they're ready to be published, they're like, here's a list of reviewers, you got to contact them. They put my name on it. And I've been getting a lot of requests that way and making really good connections with authors. I reach out, or publishers, I reach out to them and let them know what I'm doing. And then I've reviewed work for their authors and they can always send somebody my way,
Yeah.
And they'll always get an honest review.
Yeah. Now, you brought up something that I was going to ask you about later, but I'm going to ask it now because of what you were just talking about in terms of books that you get that you feel like you could really only give them a 1 or a 2 with an honest review. And I so appreciate your perspective and the approach that you take with that. And I would love to discuss with you, get your opinion first on, for the average listener or reader, your thoughts on if we don't like a book, whether you think, what are your thoughts on whether we should actually post a review at all if we don't like a book?
Yeah, I think that you should. Now, I get requests and sometimes, but I read for myself. I mean, I'm a writer. I do research. I read for entertainment. And sometimes I'll just, be browsing. I have like several wish lists that are for books to be reviewed. I'm an advocate for anti-censorship. So I purposely go through and look for books that are on the American Library Association's banned book list so I could read them and review them and share. And I post all stuff about that on my website as well. But I think that, if you read a book and you don't like it, write a review and explain why you don't like it, but not in a way to where you are degrading the author or the content. If you don't like, say, I'm just going to throw this out there. If you don't like horror books, don't buy a horror book, read it, or don't read it, or read it and just say, I don't like this because I hate horror and I was scared, or something to that effect. If you aren't comfortable with reading something and you don't like that particular genre, don't buy that particular book.
Right. I've been on the author side of that, where I had some review that started off with, this is not really my genre. And I thought, well, then why are you writing a review?
Exactly. And because I'm a book reviewer, when I go purchase a book on Amazon, I always look and make sure the information that the author gives me is correct, because I have had authors lie to me. Then they get banned. If I catch them in a lie, sometimes it's just an error, maybe a typo or something. Something changed, and they didn't mean it. It came out misleading, but it wasn't. I call them on it, and if they really did lie, they won't answer me back.
Yeah.
But then they're, oh my God, I made a mistake. I put the wrong date down, something like that. Then, if they respond back, then, it was an error. It wasn't an intentional lie, but some people have been put on I call it my no-fly zone. And I also have disreputable reviewers and publishers, or just authors that are just unkind or unethical. So I have what I call the no-fly zone, and it's a private list that I have, and I don't share it with anybody.
Yeah. Let's just take a short pause, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about your writing and some of the other things that you are up to. Would you like to earn more from your audiobook sales? If you're an author with an audiobook, you may have noticed that royalties from Audible especially, and other platforms as well, are frankly kind of pathetically low, disappointingly low, and unfairly low considering what it cost you in effort and resources to create it. How is it the retailers are the ones making all the money off your work and investment? As someone who started in the audiobook industry in 1981, I've found it frustrating that authors keep getting shortchanged. The good news is that Pro Audio Voices just launched Amplify Audiobooks, a direct sale audiobook platform for authors that puts you back in the driver's seat. Earn 65% of the gross sales price that you set. Compare that to the percentage of the percentage that retailers give. Run promotions on schedule whenever you want. Create coupon codes. Build community with your customers, since you'll know who they are and how to contact them. Work with a caring, responsive, supportive team to help you succeed all along the way. Get help with marketing. Get paid weekly. We're helping audiobook authors who are frustrated by painfully low royalties and the barriers that prevent them from managing their own products and customers. Amplify Audiobooks is a direct sale platform that enables authors to earn much higher royalties and have way more control. We're disrupting the audiobook industry by putting authors first. Get started today at proaudiovoices.app or go to proaudiovoices.com and click on the Distribution Amplify link. Join the movement. And we're back. So, Amy, tell us a little bit, if you would, about your own writing. I noted on your website that your stories mostly focus on the strength of women. And I would love to hear about like the beginning of your writing journey. And then also, I know that you've had some personal challenges that you've had to deal with and how that may have impacted, your writing. So let's start off with how you got started writing in the first place.
Well, as soon as I could talk, my mother noted this to me, that when I was about 4, she called me her little storyteller because I would just make up stories. I'm 4 years old, talking up a storm. And as soon as I could write, I like to write, there'd be maybe a page about the 3 bears because I didn't like the way that the 3 bears was told. So I wrote my own version.
Nice.
And ever since then, I was always I liked the short stories. And as I got older, I did poetry, but I was really big on would never lie to my mom, but I would always give her the long version of whatever my explanation was. I always emphasized that. And I did that to my friends and stuff like that too. Throughout high school, I wrote short stories about them and their boyfriends, and they all loved that. I wrote poetry. I went through a dark period where I was writing poetry. I actually read the dictionary in high school because I wanted to improve my vocabulary.
Wow.
It took a little while for my English teachers to realize that the way I wrote, it wasn't to impress somebody with big words. It was just, that was the way that I wrote. That was the way that I spoke. And because they're like, oh yeah, you're just using big words. I'm like, did I use them wrong? And then I had, a few, I had some poetry published in the school. We had a school magazine called Expressions where we were allowed, people could contribute stories or poetry or whatever they wanted to the magazine. And mine was accepted. I had a few poems published in that. And throughout the years, when I had time, I would write short stories, mostly poetry. I kept notebooks. And even as I got married twice and I had 4 boys, all grown men. But in 2004, my second husband, his mother passed away. Eventually, he's the one that we're going to discuss in a little while about what happened at the end of that marriage. But when my mother-in-law died, my mom had died years before. She died in 1997, and she was a writer. And she just wrote so she could tell she had something to read to us.
Oh, that's sweet.
She thought her own stories were better than books that she could buy,
Yeah,
she bought us books and things like that and encouraged us all to read. But she wrote stories it was a never-ending story specific for us so she could read it to us. I actually have a few of her notebooks. I wish I had them all. But when my mother-in-law passed away, I was, it was kind of like that year, 2004, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. I had to undergo a couple of treatments before it went into remission. And then my mother-in-law passed away. And I was trying to, you kind of reevaluate your life. And, when these things happen. And I'm like, I got to do something that's just for me. And one night I woke up and I had this dream of this story. And so the next night, when the kids were in bed and my husband went to bed, I always had an hour or two before I went to bed just to kind of relax and, unwind. So I started sitting at my computer and I started typing a story. I thought it would end up being a short story. In 4 weeks, actually, every night of December in 2004, I wrote a little bit in this story. And by the end of December, it was a full-length novel, first draft. So I wrote it in 4 weeks.
Wow. And was that the first book that you've published?
Yes, Unwritten Life. That was my very first book. It was the first full-length novel that I ever wrote. And this is 2004, 2005, it was like,
yeah.
the internet was barely born.
Right. Real early days in indie publishing.
Yeah, very, where vanity presses, print on demand,
Right.
self-published. Indie authors sound so much better than self-published.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of stigma back then. Oh, self-publishing. And, there are people that probably should not have published their books because they can't write worth anything. And those give the people who could write a bad name. And sometimes that stigma still, it's attached to us. But I sent my book out after some prodding from my friend. I'm like, I don't know, I'm like, it's just a story, I'm like, and I was just excited that I got published. It was like a traditional but print on demand book, so if somebody bought it, then they would print it and whatever. And that seemed okay. And then I had a couple other books published by them. But then after a while, I was like, when they started having like where you could do things yourself, and I kind of am I was a really big control freak. So I learned myself that I could create covers, and because I was pretty adept at Photoshop and stuff, and I still do stuff like that now, and I'm much better than I was, 20 years ago. But I just learned that I could do it my own time. I set my own deadlines, and then as soon as I could, with the first 3 books that I had published with that publisher, I wanted to get the rights back. Not only because I wanted to republish it, because my first book, there were a few errors that ended up when I did the next reprint, but I did a sequel, and I kind of corrected those errors in the sequel, but I really wanted to correct some of those errors that were in the first book to begin with.
Right, yeah.
And it was a mistake that just it was a good mistake, because in the original book, I called this one character Mike, and then later I referred to him as Mark. And I didn't catch it. The editor didn't catch it. It was like, in case maybe they thought it was somebody else. And so when I revised it and got my rights back and reprinted it, I made Mike and Mark twins. And yep, they were identical twins, except one had a mustache and the other one did not. And
see, now that's some good creative problem solving with your writing.
Yeah,
I love that solution.
I don't like to delete. When I'm writing, I don't delete. When I write, I always write. If I have to have a stopping point, I always write at least the first line of the next chapter. And then I pick up from that line when I sit down to write again. And I always make sure I do that. And then I don't, unless sometimes, you just get a story block. I don't think people get writer's block. I think they get story block. So you could get like stuck in one story and you don't know where to go, but that doesn't mean you can't write something else and then come back to it, because I've done that several times. And if I had to go back to it, then I would read it from the beginning to the end. But if I'm going on, I just keep writing till the first draft is complete, and then the second draft is when I actually go through, read it, make sure things connect and all that stuff. I worry about all the minor grammar and all that stuff. I want to make sure the story connects and has closure or whatever it needs, and I tie up all the loose ends that way. And that's just like kind of my process.
So this is 20 years ago now, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And so if we were then, it's so great to hear how it all began. Now, fast forward for us, were there experiences that you had along your writing journey to date that significantly impacted either the content of your writing or your process? Listeners, I just want to alert you before you head into the next section of this podcast episode that the following section includes some very challenging material to listen to, including descriptions of violence. And if you would like to skip ahead past that section, please jump to about 20 minutes before the end of the episode.
I would say yes. In November of 2005, my husband at the time, he decided to try to kill me. So with his bare hands, he tried to beat me to death. And when that didn't work, he tried to choke me to death. And that lasted for about 45 minutes. I have 3 sons from him. I have an older son from my first husband who's still alive, and he was just a jerk. But my second husband, we were together for 13 years, married for 5. We had just celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary. And then I found out he was going through a lot, and I thought he was having depression. And I knew he had always had a substance abuse problem. He was, recovered over the years. He had had some lapses. And those times when I would call him out on it, when I caught him, he went and he got help. He went to the AA, he went to NA, he went to counseling, and was back on the straight and narrow. And it happened 2 or 3 times over that span. But this time was different. It was after his mother died, he inherited a lot of money, and he did not know how to handle money, that much money. And we had bought a home, and he was spending like crazy, and then he blamed it on me. And I said, well, I told you not to do this, or my opinion was to not put $30,000 into a pool. I said, I don't swim.
Yeah.
And I said, I told you to cover it up, bury it. And yeah, it just, we had come to a point in our marriage, in that August, we sat down and we really had a long discussion about what we should do, if we should continue on. And we agreed to try to make it work. In the end of October of 2005, I found out that he was doing drugs again. And I told him he had to choose his family or his drugs, but he couldn't have both. So the next day I had gone out. I had a good job where I could work from home. And I was doing that a lot because I didn't know when he was doing drugs, but I thought, when he was depressed, he couldn't really take care of our kids. So I worked from home a lot. So I would be there when they got home from school. And so I had run some errands, and I came home, and I just started doing what I normally did. I got the boys their dinner. I was making their lunch. He came up behind me, asked me what I was doing. And it was really obvious what I was doing. I was continuing to work. I left my back was still turned to him, but I'm like, I'm making lunches. And he called me an effing liar. And next thing I know, he grabbed me by the ponytail and basically knocked me off my feet. And it started. At one point, it was a lot of, his favorite thing to do was to punch me in the face with both fists. And then he would get mad when I try to protect myself. One time a few times I had tried to run to lock myself in the bedroom, but he caught me. He slammed my head against the wall, and I woke up. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but I woke up to him kicking me, telling me to stop faking it. Eventually, he got tired, so he sat down in his recliner, and he grabbed me by the hair, pulled me on his lap, and he told me that I was going to die and he was going to kill me, and he wrapped his hands around my throat, and I started to black out. And, they say that, when you think you're dying, your life flashes before your eyes. Well, my death flashed before my eyes. I was terrified that my boys, my twins were 6, and my older son hadn't turned 9 yet. And I could see them finding me dead on the living room floor. So whatever strength I had left, and I didn't think I had anything left, I catapulted myself off his chest and I ran out. I know he chased me, but I just kept running. It was November, upstate New York, cold. I didn't have my glasses, and I can't see 2 feet in front of me without my glasses because he had ripped them from my face. I used to smoke back then, so all I had was a light t-shirt, no bra because he had grabbed my shirt so hard that he ripped my bra from my body. My jeans were torn. My face was probably 10 times its normal size. I'm glad I had my cigarettes and my lighter in my pocket, because when I was hiding, because I knew either he was coming out after me or he was sending his friend out after me. His friend was staying with us, and he walked in the middle, and then he turned around and left. He could have called the cops. He could have done anything. He didn't do anything. He just walked away. And then when I was right that my husband did send him out to look for me. And so I was glad that I hid. Eventually, and 5 hours later, the nearest state troopers barracks, I found myself on their back steps. And I just, I was about to ring the bell, and I guess I collapsed, because next thing I know, this female cop was standing over me, asking me if I was okay. And when I looked up at her, I could just see the shocked look on her face. It looked like I was wearing a Halloween mask. And she called in, and all these state troopers came rushing out. They took care of me. I told them they had to go get my kids. And I never went. People always ask me, why didn't you just go to neighbors for help? And I was like, I wasn't going to get anybody else hurt. What if they saw me go to a neighbor's house and then they tried to hurt that person? I wasn't going to do that. I was not going to put other people in danger. I knew in my heart of hearts that the one thing he would never do is he would never raise a hand to our sons. And he didn't. I just thought I would have been able to get help a lot sooner. But the state troopers called the local police, and they went and got my children and put them in foster care. And they arrested my husband at the time. It just took a long time for him to be convicted. And I had to, they say you can't fight City Hall. Well, I had to fight the district attorney's office to file charges. And I was able to do that with help from good friends. And one of my friends, her boss was a state legislator. So she got me press conferences, and that got the ball rolling for him to go to prison.
Clearly, you have been through a kind of hell that most of us, thank God, do not have to go through.
And I'm really glad that, it was a hard time, but unfortunately, since that day, it was November 2nd, 2005, I have had the same headache, because I had 6 impact blows on my brain. So if I did a CT scan now, you could actually see they have these white spots, which basically are scars on my brain from what he had done. And I would always just put I took care of my boys. And then as they got older, they were always my focus. And then as they got older, then I had to really take care of my dad. So I was like putting my stuff aside, and it's like my body said, okay, she's got to do all this other stuff. And then once I didn't have to do that, I mean, my youngest boys, they're 26. I'm their roommate now. And my dad, I had to put him in a memory care facility. So I do oversee some of his stuff, but I have after I stopped having to take care of other people, I started having strange symptoms, tremors. They tested me for Parkinson's. Then I was telling them how my hands hurt all the time, and they tested me for everything under the sun they could do. And then they found out that I have not just tremors, but I have rheumatoid arthritis, and it is spreading. So my immune system is shot, so I can't even really go see my dad anymore. Not that he knows who I am, but I send him magazines and stuff to read. But they couldn't figure out what was wrong, even with the brain trauma. And basically, my brain thinks that my body needs to be in pain. It's like it's rewired itself. It's kind of like a computer rewired, and I wish I could reboot it, but I can't.
So now you have been through this, I don't even know how to describe it. Hell sounds like not even nearly a strong enough word, but you have been through all of this. At what point did you find that you were able to come back to your work in the author world?
Writing became, as I was going through this, before this happened, I had wrote 3 books, but I was in the process of writing a fourth one. And what I thought was really strange was one of the books that I had written and published before this happened, my main character had been kidnapped and beaten by her kidnapper, and she escaped by running through woods and hiding. And that's exactly what happened to me, but after I wrote that.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, oh, wow. And then, when I was reading stuff that I had already wrote, and I wrote about stuff I had written about domestic violence before, or assault on women and what I thought they would feel. And, me, I'm not a crier and I don't like pity. Support, I don't mind. But, I would get those looks like, oh, you poor baby. And I'm like, don't do that to me. I'm not a poor baby. I survived, and I survived because of my children. And I knew I had to take care of myself in order to take care of my boys. And that's what I did. And writing, after that, it just became an outlet. And then I would read stuff that I wrote, and I'm like, oh, well, I did feel this way. Or, so what I was writing, after everything happened, I was like, yeah, that's okay to feel this way. Because people kept telling me, oh, you should feel this way, or you should be crying. Or I'm like, why? Why do I have to cry? Or the woman, and it's funny, this is like the first scene in my fictional book, Fractured Tears, which is about, it's about what happened to me. The second half is nonfiction, but the first half of it is a fictional story based off of what had happened to me. And the first scene in the book was a scene that actually happened. I just changed the names, but the character's name is Anna, and she was with her social worker. And it was because at the hospital, this woman, I don't know, like they have a handbook or something. She came into my room, and I still couldn't see. I didn't have my glasses yet. I had some friends go to my home later and have to break in to get some personal items, including my glasses, so I could see after a few days, because it took me a little while to get up the nerve to call people up and say, hey, this is what happened. And the social worker came in, and she's like sitting there with a file on her lap, and then she's taking notes, and she's like, she looks at me like, shakes her head, and I'm like, don't do that. I said, I don't even have to see the expression on your face, but I could see her head shaking. I said, don't feel sorry for me. She goes, it's not your fault. I said, of course it's not my fault. She goes, it's not? I'm like, why do you think it is? She's like, well, like it's like she was looking at this pamphlet or something that was saying, oh, like a checklist. They're going to feel sorry for themselves. They're going to blame themselves. But, oh, he still loves me. They're not going to, all that stuff. And I'm like, the first thing after I was able to comb all my hair out, I lost a lot of hair that day. The next thing I did was I took my wedding rings off, and I gave them to security. And the funny part is, actually, after I had gone home, I realized that they were still at the hospital. So I went back and I got them from security, and later on I just sold them so my kids could have some food. But yeah, it was just like, that was like, okay, I'm not married anymore. So that was, just what I did. I was like, my kids, I wanted to get my kids back. I had to go to family court. Social services said I was a bad mother because I ran out of the house and left them there. And I'm like, I didn't know I was going to take 5 hours to get help. And I knew he wouldn't hurt them. And they were so mad that the judge ruled in my favor and gave me my kids back.
So it sounds like your writing was really helpful to you in your healing process. Does that sound like that's true?
Yeah, it was. And some is, writing stories. I also kept a journal, writing down things that, I was feeling or whatever. And it's interesting now to look back and see what I had wrote. And, and I'm like, no, I kind of feel that same way now. I mean, I don't feel sorry for myself. When I think about my marriage, when it was good, it was pretty good. I never, when we had bad times, they weren't like that. I never saw forever with him. I just figured that, he was, I like older men. So he was 18 years older than I was. So I figured he would die and that's how our marriage would end. I didn't realize that I would almost die and that's how our marriage would end. But I think that because of his attitude after things happened, if it was going to end, it had to end that way. And that paved the road so that I wouldn't have to worry about him trying to take my kids away, go through all that garbage because, he was in prison. And when he got out, that was one thing he wanted to do. I didn't know that, but I just had this feeling. And then he died. So my kids weren't scared anymore. One of my twins, his name is William. He has special needs. He was autistic and bipolar, and he was a hard one to raise. But I raised my 3 sons by myself, and I did the best that I could. And I told them I would always protect them from their father, and I would protect them sometimes from themselves.
So, in terms of your writing projects, is there anything that you're working on currently?
No, actually, in March, I am releasing my very first nonfiction historical book. The past 2 years, or the past year and a half, just because of my hands and stuff, I've only been writing short stories. And I had wrote this book called The Forsaken, and it was the first book I ever wrote that took place in my hometown, mainly where I grew up. And it's just a short, well, it's not too short, but it's a paranormal book about a woman who I named her after my late grandmother, because my grandmother passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 101, and we were like best friends. So I wanted to honor my grandmother. So the character's name is named after her. Some of the other characters are named after her family members. They're not them. It's just I was trying to do that, to honor them. And in doing the research for that, because I wanted to make sure, it was basically, this woman is trying to help her father's aide solve a missing persons case that happened in the 1800s. And there was only a little bit of story about it. And there's like some spirits involved, and the house that they live in is in the middle of the cemetery. Basically, the cemetery was built around it. And that's kind of a historical thing. I just made it into a house that people lived in. It actually, there was a building there, and it was supposed to be a church, but then it ended up being a meeting place for the townfolk. But I did a lot of research. So in getting that, I got, there's a point in your research where you're like, okay, I have enough. And then I was looking at other stuff, and I'm like, this is really interesting. So I started researching the history of the town I live in. And it was these 2 townships. They intersect in the small town, Balsam Spa. That's where I grew up mainly. I mean, we moved around a lot, but it's a place that I call home. And it used to be one township, and it was named after a man. His last name was Ball, and it ended up calling Ball's Town. So I did a lot of research, and I put this book together, and it was just inspired from my research for that little short story. And it's coming out on March 21st. And I picked that date because that is the 217th anniversary of the village's incorporation.
Oh, that's great.
And
that's great.
Yeah, so I thought it was it's like people ask me, what's your favorite book? And, I know my favorite characters and stuff. Like it started with Unwritten Life, and then I would write other stories, and then I kept going back to that. Unwritten Life was the first one, and now it has 67 volumes, and the last volume is its finale, and like 9 bonus books that I wrote. So that's where a good chunk of my stories were. I kept going back to this town and my characters because I just love them. It's like you always love your first character.
Yeah.
But this one, it was like because of I love doing research. I like learning things. I'm a lifelong learner. If I want to learn something, I'll do whatever I can to get the answers. I just love to learn, and I like to share what I know. That's why I help authors, because, maybe some of my experiences can help them. They don't have to go through all the stuff that I did to find out. I could just say, hey, here you go. This is what you could do.
Yeah.
But this was my favorite because of all the work that I put into it, and I learned so much. And I joke to people that this is the book that's going to make me famous in my hometown. And I'm not saying that. I mean, people know who I am in my hometown that I went to high school with. And, I have people that buy my books because, they know me and they're like, oh, you're this famous author. I'm like, yeah, if I sell one book, I get excited.
So, as we wrap up, I would love it if you would share with our listeners some of the author services that you provide. So we know that you write reviews, and what else do you do for authors as you help them?
I will do various author promotions. We'll create book trailers, or what I call book review trailers, where I will put together a video that they can use for advertising with the book review that I have, wrote for them. I do a lot of that on Amy's Bookshelf Reviews. And I started doing more promotions on that website because that's where like the majority of my audience is. That's amysbookshelfreviews.com. I promote my other work on my business website, which is essenceenterpriseus.com. When I used the term literary consultant, and I don't know if that was really a thing. It was something I made up for myself because I was trying to figure out, okay, I do all this stuff, but, I need like one title. So I came up with literary consultant because then what an author can tell me what they need. It could be they might need editing. They might just need help formatting their book. They might want me to do the do-it-yourself, indie publishing for them, like on their behalf. Maybe they want me to be a beta reader or do some additional promotions. Or I've just started, it went live January 7th, and I'm just doing an Amy's Bookshelf Review podcast, and it's just basically talking about reviews and books and things that authors can do. So I just kind of call it, I say it's really about book reviews and author interviews and literary news. So it just kind of came out that way. When somebody's like, what's it about? And I said that. I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of catchy.
That's great.
But, I do a lot for authors. So, and sometimes I just do something and it's, I might see something like when I post a review on Amazon and I notice that they don't have an Amazon profile page, but they have several books, or they only have one book, but they're writing more. So I mentioned that, you should do this. Or if something doesn't look right on a website, or their links are off, or their Amazon profile, like they have, their books aren't synced up with each other, I point those things out to authors, and I help them whenever I can. When I charge for services, I'll give them my estimate, but then I will work if they have a budget, and a lot of authors do, especially if writing is like their second career or second job or whatever, and they're not making billions off their bestsellers, then I tell them that I will work within their budget. And I never compromise quality just because they're going to pay less than maybe an author who can afford more.
Well, we, in the author, I'll just speak for authors at this moment because I think that can't imagine any dissent. Appreciate all that you're doing, Amy. This is, so again, for our listeners, to learn more about Amy's bookshelf reviews, you go to amysbookshelfreviews.com, and to learn more about what else Amy is busy doing in the author support world, go to essenceenterprisesus.com. And this is, again, Amy Shannon. Thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.